Hello everyone, and as you heard, my name is Ron Storm, and I'm a social scientist. And as a social scientist, what I like to do is I like to study people. And the reason I study people is I want to understand why they do what they do. I want to understand how people interact with themselves, with groups, and with technology. So today what I'd like to talk to you about is a question that I've had for probably about the last 20 years. And I've actually been studying it for the last 10 years. And the question I have is, do I need to be a jerk to be successful? It's a good question, right? We all wonder these things. And I first started thinking about this as I was growing up in business. But first I want to define what I believe is a jerk. And what I believe is a jerk is someone that shows high ego and arrogance. And what I mean by that is someone that, well, is a jerk and doesn't listen to others, doesn't listen to alternatives, has their very strong opinions and really forces them through. So before I go any further, I want to ask a couple questions, because I think this same question is held by many people in the audience today. So how many people, well, before I do that, how many bosses do we have here? All right, we'll change the question. How many people work with a jerk? Okay, we have a lot of hands up. So now here's the next question, and this is a little harder question. And this question is really only going to work if we're all honest with ourselves. When thinking about that jerk, how many people believe that that jerk is in the role that they are and their success is in part due to them being a jerk? Okay. We actually have a few hands up. And that's really a good example of our society. We really have a split. Some people believe that you need to be a jerk to be successful, and others believe that a jerk is actually a detriment to your organization. You know, if you look at pop culture, you see it all the time. You see reality TV in magazines and articles, and it really troubled me. I didn't know the answer. So as growing up in industry, as I was a young engineer, I kept looking around me and I kept seeing more and more jerks, and I wondered, is this the person I had to become? And then I had the opportunity to go to a corporate retreat. And if you've never been on a corporate retreat, that wasn't even a joke, and that's good. So if you've ever been on a corporate retreat, you will know my experience. So I'm at this corporate retreat, and I'm sitting in a room, and it's much like a room like this, and we're hearing a motivational speaker talk about decision making. And this motivational speaker is going on and on about decision making, and out of the crowd, a very senior executive of a large company stands up. And he says, I try to make a decision with 40% of the information, and I really don't do the best job. I think I should do more, and I think I should talk more to my team. And everyone in the audience is kind of nodding their head. And then in the back corner, up stands a guy and says, 40%, 4%. That's what I do. And people lifted him up on their shoulders, and they're running around chanting, 4%, 4%, 4%. And I'm sitting here thinking, really? Is this kind of how the world works? So I put that behind me for a few years, and I was on a cross-country trip when I encountered the biggest jerk of my life that really changed the way I think about this. And what happened was, I had this great opportunity. I was going to California, and we were flying cross-country, and it was over a weekend. I had some work on Thursday and Friday, and I brought my girlfriend with me, and we'd been dating about a year, so it was a very nice opportunity to take a trip together. So we land in San Francisco, and instantly, up there in first class, up pops cell phone guy. And we all know cell phone guy if we travel on business, right? The moment the plane lands, cell phone comes out, and as you can see, this was the early 2000s, so we had a flip phone. And we've been in the air for 6 hours, and he is just berating people about how deals aren't getting done, how nothing happened while he's been gone, what's going to happen, the weekend's coming up, and on and on and on. So finally, the door opens, and we grab our bags, and we get off the plane. And my girlfriend turns to me and says, I cannot believe you. You are the biggest jerk I've ever seen. Did you really get up and pick that cell phone up? And you're just yelling at people. And at that moment, I realized that I was that jerk. It was a long weekend, let me tell you that. So then, as a social scientist, I really started questioning this, and I really started looking into it. And I thought to myself, well, how can I prove this out? So I started doing some research, and I started thinking about how I can measure if a jerk is more successful than someone that isn't a jerk. And I kept thinking about what makes a jerk. And I thought, okay, ego and arrogance are two big things. So I started doing research. And then first I had to think about how I was going to study this. So what I thought is, well, I'm going to get some people together and I'm going to study them. I'm going to see who makes bad decisions. So I picked up the phone and I called a bunch of my friends and I said, hey, I would like to, look at your managers and tell them which ones are jerks or not. And you would guess at how many phones got hung up on me, right? Every one of them. So then I thought, well, I'm going to try to do this using concepts of big data and online gaming. So I found a multiplayer online game that I could use. And the reason why I used it is because I could get a definitive winner and loser. And the teams would be able to play for a long period of time, and I would know exactly who won and lost. I would capture all the data, and I'd have thousands and thousands of data points, which we social scientists love. So the first thing I did was I thought of a theory of how can I test the concept of cohesion and ego and arrogance. And the thing that came to mind when I did my research was that I studied a concept called groupthink. And the theory of groupthink is a theory that Dr. Irvin Janis came up with. And what Dr. Irvin Janis came up with is he said that groups that are highly cohesive and exhibit signs of ego and arrogance, and he had about 6 other things that he talked about, but it was basically poor group dynamics, feelings of invincibility, not looking at alternatives, stereotyping, mind guarding, meaning stopping people from sharing their ideas, would exhibit poor decision making. So Dr. Janis, most instantly, he came up with this concept because what was happening was his daughter asked him, she had to do a report on the Bay of Pigs invasion. And she said, why is it that President Kennedy made such a poor decision? And this was a troubling question. So he thought about it, and he thought about it, and he thought about it, and there were so many smart people involved with President Kennedy that it really troubled a lot of individuals that this decision was made. So he came up with the theory of groupthink. And the theory of groupthink has been used numerous times. It was actually, the Challenger disaster was an example of where they believe groupthink took place. So there was an author by the name of Dr. Glaser who created the Groupthink Index, or a way to measure groupthink. And I measured 2 things. I measured our invulnerability and what we called belief in morality, so that they had their own belief in morality that they were always right. So next, Dr. Janis says that as long as you can measure, if you can measure groupthink and you measure cohesion and you show that cohesion increases, then you would prove that there's groupthink. So I used a tool called the Group Environment Questionnaire by Karen Brawley and Winmere. And that tested the theory of social and task cohesion. And what it said is that groups that work together socially make poorer decisions. And groups that work together in tasks actually make better decisions, so they're more focused on the task. So I did my study, and my study lasted 20 weeks, and I got some very interesting results. And the results that I received said that teams that scored highest in feelings of invulnerability, or what I call arrogance, lost every time. Next, I saw that teams that scored highest in ego lost every single time. And finally, I saw that teams that scored highest in social cohesion, meaning that they had a greater esprit de corps, lost again every time. So teams that scored higher in ego, arrogance, and social cohesion were less effective as the other teams that scored lower. And in keeping with Dr. Janis's theory, I also found that teams that scored highest in task cohesion won more often. So people that were focused more on the task than on keeping the group together won. Next, as a good social scientist, you always try to measure additional things. And the thing I measured was communication, because I thought communication would be an indicator of good and bad decision making. And what I found out is that teams that won every time were 50% more likely to communicate more than the others. So this really changed the way I was thinking. So from that moment forward, I started thinking about how I communicate with others, how I interact with others. It showed that I don't need to be that jerk. So really my takeaways from today are that this is an experiment that was done with great scientific rigor. We did a large survey. We had multiple players play. We had over 10,000 data points. And it showed that people that do not listen to alternatives lose more. That jerks are less effective than those that are not. Now, what I'm not telling everyone here today is that you have to lose your passion, or you have to slow down your decision making, or that you have to hug it out, right? Do I look like a huggy guy? But what I am saying is that when you're working with your teams and you're working with groups and you're working with other individuals, take that few seconds just to think about what you're getting ready to do. Think about, is this my ego getting in the way? Am I being arrogant about this? Am I thinking about the alternatives? Am I not listening to my colleagues? Do they have good ideas that I'm not using? And by doing that, in those few split seconds, you'll be more effective, you'll win more, and you'll be happier. And in the past 5 years, since I have come up with this and I've finished my research, I have been much happier in life and in business. And most importantly, I know where I'm going. So thank you, everyone. Thanks.